Hey guys, in this video we'll start modifying some of the aesthetics around our application. So I have it in debug mode and this is our application. And you can see it's very plain, but nowadays simple is more, right? Less is more. So don't mind the white spaces, but some modifications that we're going to be making include changing the name that is displayed here. So you see leave_management, that's the actual name of our project, but that might not be the name of the application itself. So we'll learn how to change this. We'll get to understand that we can make the changes one time or certain changes one time and they'll replicate throughout the application, because our .NET Core application gives us something like a layout page where we change things once and it is changed globally. So you'll notice that the nav bar and the footer are static regardless of the page we're on. If I go to privacy, it's the same nav bar and footer. If I go to register, it's the same nav bar and footer. All right, so you notice that there are certain things that are consistent, and that's because there is a base file that can be modified to, make these things kind of static and global in our application. So back in Visual Studio, and I'll just close this, getting out of debug mode, and then we go back to Visual Studio, and we're going to be going into the views folder. We're going to expand shared and we're going to layout.cshtml. So that opens up one big HTML page. So if you've done any work with HTML and by extension Bootstrap, then you should be, able to navigate your way around this page. There are a few things here that are kind of different from the standard HTML page, but as we go along, I'll explain them, no problem. So we have the standard HTML format, or what I call the skeleton, where we have our doc type, or declarations at the top, our head tag and our body tag, all of that inside of our HTML tag. All right. And inside of head, we have certain meta tags that are required for us to be both globally acceptable in our char set and also to have a responsive website. And this is required by Bootstrap for responsive website design. Then we have our title. So the first thing I want to change is the title. So you see here it has leave_management, which is the ugly text that we said we want to get rid of. And then you'll also notice that it has this @ and something that is kind of highlighted in gray and doesn't quite look like HTML or static text. So once you see the @ and that gray highlight over text, that means it's Razor syntax or C# in HTML, pretty much. So view data is a kind of variable that is available to us inside of our .NET Core applications, and we can kind of set the view data to be what we want it to be from the controller, and then that is what will get printed in this section of the title. And then the hyphen and leave management are static. So I'm actually just going to change this and I'm going to call our application core leave management. So for more context, pretty much when you go on Amazon.com and you click on the products page, if you look in your tab, you would realize that you see products Amazon.com, or maybe you see Amazon.com some indicator of what page you're on. This is pretty much all they do. Amazon.com would be static, that never changes, but then they dynamically tell you what page you're on based on when you browse. So if I go back to controllers, or rather if I go back to the views of home and I click index, then you'll see here that we're actually setting the view data title to be home page. And then in the layout, it is going to be printing whatever I put in that title, and then hyphen whatever static text I put there. So for every page that we will create, we can, if you want to be that meticulous, no problem. You just make sure that you are very particular about what you put there. So homepage hyphen core leave application is what will get loaded when we browse to our homepage. And for privacy, it will be privacy policy hyphen core leave management. All right, so that's how that view data section works. And then you see that we're referencing our Bootstrap style sheet as well as the site.css, and you see the links, the CSS/site .css, and that's coming from our www root css folder, that site. And this one is coming from the lib bootstrap folder, dist css, and in that we have the bootstraps files. All right, so that's how those links work, and by extension that it's similar for the script files. So the scripts are usually referenced at the bottom of the page so that the page renders before the script files render, because we don't want to keep our people waiting. And so modern technique would have us put the script files at the bottom of the page so that the content can load until the script file loads. So we have that, and we also have a section. I'll get to the section in a few. Now let's start by modifying our navbar. So our navbar is a Bootstrap navbar, and if you're not so familiar with Bootstrap or you want more reinforcement with what you can do with Bootstrap, then you can go to their website, getbootstrap.com, where you will have access to all of their documentation, examples, and so on. So Bootstrap 4.4 is the latest. That's what, well, I'm not sure if it's 4.4 that the project comes with, but it's definitely 4. So if you're not the latest, then you're pretty close to the latest. And once again, it comes built in, so we don't have to pay much attention to the installation directions. But if you want to understand how the navbar works and how the classes work, then we can go to, I believe it's documentation, and then we can look for utilities. If it's not utilities, then it's components. And as you can see, it's quite a big document. But in components, then we have navbar. So when we click navbar, then it brings us to the section where we can actually look at the code that is required for a navbar. And that's the example of what the code below will render for you. So you can be guided. You can use this guide to understand the code better, but I'm going to be walking you through some of the changes that we'll be making for our application. So firstly, I don't want a light navbar, so you have an option of light and dark. And let me just go back and show you the different options you have. So there you have dark, you have blue, you have light blue. I want it to be navbar dark and bg-dark. So I'm going to go back to my code. And I see here I have navbar dash light. That's almost the default. So I'm going to say dash dark. And I'm going to change this to BG dash dark. But then if I erase that and I do control space, then you'll see that Visual Studio Code kind of gives me, some what we call IntelliSense. So it helps you as you go along with your code, even with Bootstrap classes. So I did say I want BG dark. So I'm selecting BG dark. And that is one change that I'm making. Then I'm going to make some changes to my navigation properties. So for each link that appears in the navbar, you need an li with the class nav item, and then you'll have an anchor tag, which has, well, the classes for the anchor tag, however you want them to look. So I want the text to be text dash, and I want it to be white. I believe I can say white, right? So I need the text to be white because the navbar is going to be dark, right? So I'm kind of inverting it here. All right. So my nav link and then the text dash white is going to make it white text, and ASP area, ASP controller is equal to home, and the action is index. So that means that when I click this home link, right, like we did when we went into debug mode, you saw it come up and we had home and privacy links. So this is the home link and this is the privacy link. And when you click the home link, it's going to look for the controller called home, right? And we did establish that we have a controller called home, right? And then it's going to look for the action. So an action is pretty much that function that I showed you inside of the controller. So you see that it's called action result. So the action is that function, and it must have the name index. So it's looking for an action called index. And so when I click home, that is my user request to see the index action or view in the home controller. So when I click home, it's going to look for firstly that controller. So if that controller doesn't exist, then you get an error. All right. And then if it does find it, then it's going to look for the action inside it. And if it doesn't exist, you also get an error. If it does exist, then it's going to do whatever is inside that space for the function. In this case, it's just returning the view. So it's now going to look in the views folder for the corresponding home views collection, and then it's going to render our index content. Now, the index content is our H1 tag that says welcome and our P tag that has some link and some narrative about .NET Core. So what happens is that when we click that, this is the layout page. Whatever view is returned by our action gets rendered inside of render body. All right, so this is our header section with the nav bar. And then we go on to the content section. So once again, I'm doing all of this assuming that you have some exposure to HTML. And so you know that an HTML page, after you do your head and body tags, which are required, absolutely required for proper structure, then you structure your page. You have the header section, which usually has your nav bar and your banners and whatever else. And then you have the content that's on the page, and all of that goes to the footer. So if you look at it closely, you'll see that our layout page has the header section with our nav bar, right, which has all our links, and it also has what we call a partial for the login functions. All right, but then we also have a div that has a class called container, and this is the main section. So this is the content section of our website, and every view gets rendered inside of this section, which is why our view can be so lightweight, because we don't have to go through and declare all of the HTML syntax and everything every time we have a view. We just need to focus on the HTML that is required for that particular bit of content to be rendered to the page. All right, and so it gets rendered as in this section inside of the container, and container is a bootstrap class that gives us like a nice 80% fill on any screen that is being viewed on. All right, so I'm just walking you through this. We'll come back and modify our nav bar a bit because there's some links I need to add. But going on, we have our container, which renders our view content each time. And then we have our footer. So our footer section, I'm not going to modify the aesthetics of it, but I do want to modify the content. So we have the copy, ampersand copy, semicolon. This gives us that copyright sign. All right. And then I'm going to change this, and I'm going to show you some bit of Razor syntax. So remember that Razor allows us to put C# inside of our HTML syntax pretty much. So I'm going to modify this year to be more dynamic, because right now it's 2019 and I'm actually recording this video on New Year's Eve. So literally tomorrow is going to be 2020. So I'm just making that known so that going forward, when you see 2020 in my footer, even though we started off 2019, you're going to see 2020. This is why. So it says 2019 and it's static as 2019. So I'm just going to use some C# to make it more dynamic. So I'm going to say @ date time. All right. And then I can say no. So if I ever wanted to know the time now as I'm talking, I would use datetime.now. But then I want only the year. So I can say dot and then only get the year. So what it's going to do is have the copyright sign and then get the year as at the time the web application is loading, or the year according to the time on the server it is loading from. So my computer is accurate, fairly accurate. So tomorrow when it changes to 2020, then my date time will be 2020. If the server time is wrong or the application or the computer time is wrong, then obviously this value will be wrong. But the fact is it's dynamic. It's not going to be 2019, even when it's 2020 and 2021. So I'm just making that a bit more dynamic and just demonstrating how C# can be inserted into our HTML quite easily through the Razor engine. All right. And then I'm changing this text. And so this should also say core leave management. All right, I'm going to copy this so that I don't have to type it again. And I'll leave that privacy link. And then we have our script files being loaded. So we have our jQuery script file being loaded, the Bootstrap JavaScript file being loaded, and our custom site.js file, which is also coming from our www.root.js folder. Now, please note that with scripts and with CSS, the order matters. So that means sometimes you try to install some, like a jQuery widget or something, and then you put the script references above the jQuery reference. That's a no-no, because then you'll just get errors, it won't work, and then you'll say, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? I can't do this. So the order matters. So I just recommend that any additional script files that you're going to be adding that are not jQuery or Bootstrap, you just put them underneath. So you just keep on adding, never put above. All right. That's a good rule of thumb, of course, case by case. If you understand what you're doing, then that's fine. But just to stay out of trouble, if you're not so sure, just always add them below. And then we have our render section here. So remember, we had a render body, which is rendering all of our views. In that section, we have render section, which is called scripts, which allows us to insert scripts in the view on a case-by-case basis, because we may not need every script file for every single view. All right, so you want to reduce what files you load on what pages. So as we go along, we'll see the purpose of this, but I'm just letting you know what it's for. You don't have to remove it. You can if you want to, you don't have to. I would say don't. All right, so then what we'll do now is just make final touches to our nav bar. I just want to change at the top here where we have the first section and it's saying leave management. I'm going to put in the application name, which is core leave management. So this is the text that will be printed in the nav bar itself. We don't have to trouble much more, but I'm just going to add some other links here. So we have home, we have privacy. I have a few other links that are key to our pending activities. So I wrote the code already. I'm just going to replace the existing code with the new code and just give you a quick run through of what I'm doing. So I'm replacing the privacy link with my additional code. And so once again, we're building a leave management system. So the first link that I put in to replace privacy is one that says apply for leave. And I'm just going to make sure that my text is also white. All right, so apply for leave. That's what the employee will be doing. And then I have another one, and this one is in the form of a drop down. So this is how you do drop downs. And actually, I just took the example code from bootstrap.com because they did have a drop down example. And in their drop down example, they said that to get a drop down link, all right, that's a drop down link, then we need to go to LI. We need to have code that looks like this. So I just copied this and then modified the parts that I wanted, aka the drop down link text and the actual action or anchor tags rather. So I made that modification, and so I have the drop down items and I have all of them. But as we go along, we'll be filling them in. As we put in the functions, then we'll make the links work. So right now, that's not my objective. I just want my nav bar to look slightly like what I expect it to look. And I'm just going to take this text dash white and make sure that it is inside of each drop down item to make sure that the text is white. All right. I'm going to just go and debug and see what it looks like. All right, so this is what it looks like right now. And so you see that the nav bar has changed to dark and some links are still not text dash white. So you see that they're hidden over here, but then the others are. So those are little things that, as you go along, you test and then you realize, oh, I didn't do it correctly. Let me change it. And another thing you'd realize is that I changed my drop down links to text dash white. Well, the drop down is white, so everything here is white. So I'm just going to go back, make those modifications. And the good thing is that you can actually change the code while in debug mode. So let me start off with the partial. So I'm going to find my Solution Explorer, which may have changed position. And I'm going to go to the login partial. So this login partial houses the links for the login and register. So I'm changing this to white. and I'm going to change this one to white also, and then save. And then I can just make the change and save and go back to my debug mode, refresh. And then once the changes are reflected, then you know that you've done something right. So I just went ahead and made all the changes to make these text dash dark. And so now you're seeing everything. All right. So we have our application name. It could be a logo, you know, I'm just leaving it as application name right now. And so whatever changes we make, they would ripple across every view that is going to be rendered inside this section, which is between our nav bar and our footer. And so that's a quick introduction to making aesthetic changes to your application as you see fit. If you got a theme, maybe you have the admin LTE, whatever it is, whatever theme it is you got, or whatever look and feel you're going for, you can just make the changes one time in the layouts.cs HTML file, and they will be global to your application. If you want more than one layouts, then you can actually create another layout file, and on a case-by-case basis, you reference that layout file inside the view. We haven't created any views just yet, so when we reach that point, then you'll see what I mean by referencing it in the view. So you can go ahead and make those changes and any other that you see fit. And in the next video, we will start creating our database.